Hey everyone, welcome to another week of the Truths We Hide podcast. Today's guest is Tammi Moses. She is the founder and chief encouragement officer of Homes Are for Living. Also, the Hoarding Solution, which is a veteran, woman-owned and operated business located in Oak Harbor, Washington. She provides consultations, assessments, and workshops on the issue of hoarding. She believes in inspiring others to take their adversity and use it for the greater good. She is the voice of adult kids of parents that hoard and the voice and advocate for youth living in the hoard. You can contact Tammi at homesareforliving@gmail.com and on social media. I can't wait for you to listen to her story. Hi, Tammi. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Annette. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for being on this show. For our listeners, I've been following Tammi for a while, and I was so stinking excited to meet her in person when we went to the Military Influencers Conference in September. It was like meeting these movie stars because we were in this vet tribe and we all, correspond on Messenger on Facebook or whatever. And so to see people in person was like, I was so excited. I was like a little girl. So thank you for being on here. I'm so honored. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, your background.
Well, I would like to thank you for having me on. And I felt the same way. I was like, oh my goodness, I get to meet all these people that they're just like brothers and sisters and on the journey. It was so amazing to be like, they're real. They're real.
Right.
and so many are doing so many amazing things. It's like, wow, you really are real. It's fantastic. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm honored that you would have me as a guest.
Of course.
Wow, my story. Well, let's see. I was born and raised in a small town called Port Angeles in Washington State. I live about 3 hours from there now. I was very eager to get out of the small town. I was very involved with choir and church things and youth group, and I did travel a little bit through that, and so I knew there was more world out there that I wanted to see. And I wasn't sure how I was going to make that happen. And eventually I enlisted in the Navy in my senior year of high school.
Oh my
and and it's kind of funny because my dad was like, what? And I don't know if I even listened to my mom until years later. She was like, I couldn't believe you went in the Navy or in the military. And I was like, well, I wanted to do my own thing. And I felt like if I didn't, which is kind of ironic because you go in the military and do you get to do your own thing? No.
Not at all.
But honestly, we kind of had a chaotic atmosphere at home with a lot of clutter and stuff, and we didn't really call it hoarding at that time, but there was just a lot of stuff. Yeah. And for me, I had friends who didn't live that way, and so I could see a very stark contrast between the way we lived and the way other people lived, and that was really hard for me. And once I really made that distinction when I was in junior high, it became very, very isolating. I didn't want to have friends over. I felt weird going to their houses because I couldn't reciprocate, and so, and a lot of those things have carried over into adulthood where I feel very like I have to over respond if people do something nice for me or are kind to me, because it's like I'm still making up for that fact that I couldn't do that when I was younger.
Yeah.
And so I actually moved out of my parents' house my senior year of high school, and I lived with a family friend who needed some overnight care type of thing. And then I eventually lived with my grandma, who was very unhappy that I enlisted in the military. she was afraid all my other cousins would enlist as well.
Oh, no.
And
Don't follow Tammi.
Don't do what Tammy's doing. There was, I think, total of 8 cousins, and I was the oldest. So, I mean, I guess she did kind of have a valid fear, maybe, that I would do something. But I'm like, out of all the choices I could make, this is probably a positive one, Grandma. And I had 2 other cousins that did also go in the military, but we're all alive. You know, none of her greatest fear didn't happen, you know, that we all enlisted and all died, basically, which, I mean, I'm not saying that's not a valid fear for military people and families, because it happens. But, you know, when you're young, you're not thinking about what your grandma's worried about.
No.
So, I mean, but for me, it was the best choice I could have made. It allowed me to get out of a place. I mean, I can't say that I had good experiences. I had good things happen. I enjoyed my friends and that, but I never really fit. It felt like I just kind of never fit in. And I appreciate that more now than I did then.
Right.
Because if you're always trying to fit in, how do you figure out who you are? How do you find your path? And I think it's hard if you don't fit some mold when you're growing up. And even if you do fit a mold, you still have to find your own path. And for me, the military definitely was that. I was only in for 4 years, but I got to travel. I got promoted. I know what it's like to, even on a small scale, to lead a group of people who are looking at you like, seriously, this is what we have to do? And, you know, I mean, even simple things like cleaning the bathroom or whatever every week, you know, this is what needs to happen during your duty day or whatever. And I just tried to find ways to be like, all right, I'm putting all the things we have to do in a hat, and you pick one. You know, I'm not going to assign it. Pick one. They're all in there.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, trade, but go do it. I don't really care. Just here you go. And so, I mean, some of those things you get forced into real early. You're very young, and you're all of a sudden you're in this role, and you're leading people. Even, you know, in my opinion, what I did was rather minor versus people leading you through the desert and having to check, you know, around every corner, you know, to see where the enemy is. And I was on a ship. I mean, we rolled through some areas, but we weren't boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. And so I really have a lot of respect for the people who do that and come back, and now you're living a whole different life because of your experiences. Yeah. And so there's a lot of different experiences in the military, but honestly, I don't think it's a bad choice if you're a kid trying to figure out what to do. And fast forward all these years later, and I'm very much connected to a vetpreneur tribe, and they really are the family, you know, and yes, we're business, and yes, we're all over the country and the world, but there is still that helpful connectiveness that it never occurred to me as an 18-year-old kid signing on paperwork that one day I'd be like, oh, okay, God, maybe that's why you wanted me to go this way.
Right.
You know? Oh, there was a plan maybe after all, even though I couldn't tell.
Yeah. It's like that aha moment when you're in your 40s going, oh my God, that's why.
Yes. And now people say, oh, I'd go back to high school. I'm like, no way. I like where I'm at now. I've learned a lot. Would I like to be in my 20s again?
Yeah.
Yeah, physically, maybe.
Right. It's physically, yes.
But with what I know now, no. You know, I wouldn't want to go back to that clueless part of my life.
Right.
So it's been, you know, an interesting journey to where I am now. And I was thinking this morning about, you know, what should I talk about with Annette, you know, and for me, hoarding is definitely one of those elephants in the room type of thing where people are very isolated, and the clutter increases that isolation. And I'm really starting to see part of my my purpose is to talk about the disconnect that happens because of it. The people who don't get to ever see their grandkids. The people who tell me, my kids come to town, but they won't stay with me. Yes, that's true. Perhaps we should examine why.
Yeah.
They hesitate to bring their child to your home, or there's nowhere to sit. There's, maybe you have too many animals. Maybe it's just clutter. It could, because it isn't always like dirty.
Mm-hmm.
It could just be too much stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a very much a disconnect between the person who has the problem and seeing they have a problem, and then everyone else around them who's like, yes, mom, yes, Aunt Susie, yes, there's a problem. And so being able to find a way to break through is really a challenge and very heartbreaking if you are a family member who is trying to navigate that. Sorry, I have things popping up here and I want to get rid of it. I hope it's not recording on there. It might be. Anyway, sorry about that. So I just find that there's a need to talk about some of these harder things, and I know, that's what you do as well, is we have to talk about this stuff for people to feel less isolated and more connected.
You're so right. The hoarding thing, you don't hear those stories at all. It's like, it is one of those hidden things that people don't want to talk about. I don't even know. My family used to watch the shows, and then they would look at me and be like, Mom, I think you're kind of a hoarder. And I used to get really upset, like, no, I'm not. I don't have stuff all over the place, but I did have stuff. I had stuff. Like, I didn't have to have those things. It was an emotional purchase. It was a quick, this will make me happy purchase. And then they started to become more and more. But I never wanted to admit that. I never wanted to say anything about it. So I got offended. So nobody talks about that stuff. So how do you break that barrier with someone who is emotionally attached to things, and help them get rid of it? Because that's hard to let go of something. It's that's in your life, even if it's a pair of shoes that you don't wear but you had to have. You don't need them. So how do you help those people? That's a difficult topic.
It's so I have stuff too, and I've had to re-examine, like, because people would ask me, oh, well, do you talk about this because you're a hoarder? And I would be like, what? Oh, I guess that would be the first impression, and plus, so a couple things. One is the word hoarder inherently has like negative connotations, like it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so no one wants to be called that, and so there's and I agree with it, actually, a movement to move away from using the term hoarder. It's like calling someone an alcoholic versus someone who has a drinking issue or problem.
Right.
It's a very negative label, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that the term hoarding is accurate. You can say a person that has a hoarding problem. Yeah. And because you're still a person, and we all have problems. Right. It just, that may not be your problem. And so I just see where there's a need to look at the person. And I think, so when I look at hoarding, I see unaddressed trauma. There's something going on underneath that isn't being dealt with. And acquiring things is what kind of comes in and like fills the void type of thing. Yes. And I have an example. I have this cup here, and it's a pen cup now, but it's a butterfly mug that I got with my mom years ago in Canada. We went on this trip to the Bouchard Gardens and all that, and I chipped this cup. I did it. Nobody else. Couldn't blame anyone else. And I was like, I'm going to use the term normal loosely. Normal people would throw this cup away.
Yeah.
But I don't fit in that group. So I distinctly recall, I'm going to drink out of this cup anyway today. You could cut your lip. So what? I'm going to drink out of this cup anyway. I'll just drink on the opposite side.
Yeah.
And as you see, I kept the cup and I repurposed it into a pen cup because I'm very attached to the memory of that day, and it was enjoyable, and we still talk about it 20 plus years later that we had a good trip that day. And so detachment is really a thing. And I have other things where I've broken it and I'm like, oh well, I just throw it out. And so when you're really attached to that, it's really hard to release it. And so what I have found is that people want to be heard. And if you have too much stuff, there's a reason why, and you kind of want to tell your story. And if someone will listen to why you've kept your chipped cup or why you have 10 of them, once you kind of tell that story, they might like, oh, maybe I only want 5. And they'll release some of them. And so you kind of have to work on the human side of it. Mm-hmm. And even though the stuff is obviously a problem and is what I call a symptom, it isn't the actual problem. And it's why it's important, if you're a person that has too much stuff, why you need to be involved with deciding what stays and what goes, so that you can develop that skill around, oh, I can still have the memory, but I don't have to have all the things. And that might make me be a little calmer, and it might also allow my family to get off my back a little bit if I start doing that. So, and the thing is that detachment is real for whether you're just downsizing to sell your house or if we need to back up a dumpster. And no matter where you fall on that spectrum, that detachment piece is still huge. And I worked with people who had hoarding, wasn't even on the radar, but they had decluttered their whole house, and then they have that one room where the divorce decree is, or the military flag, or the baby shoes, or all the emotional things. And then they're like, look, I've done everything, but I just can't do this room by myself. And then you can go through that and say, okay, are you keeping this? Are you putting it in storage? Does it belong to your kid? My kid method is, did they move out and leave their things? Great. Make them each a box, put their stuff in their box, and when they come and visit, give it to them. Mm-hmm. And now you're not the bad guy saying, I got rid of your baseball card, or you can't have your Cabbage Patch Kid because I don't know what I did with it. You just put it in a box and let them decide. Mm-hmm. And that way, you're clearing out your space, but you're not responsible for what they do with their things. And there can be a lot of friction in a family if one person's a clutter bug and one person is a neat freak. It's can cause a lot of friction in households, and same even with kids. I mean, I personally don't have kids, but I hear the story of just shut your door. And so there is a lot of friction that comes about in these things because of we're different people, and well, I'm told I could go on and on about this topic, and that is true because I've just seen so much friction in families, and it causes so much pain. And it's stuff, people. It's stuff. There is no U-Haul behind the hearse. I'm sorry to tell you, but we aren't taking it with us. Right. And once you start realizing that, I don't mean you have to get rid of everything and live off of a stick. I just mean start looking at that, knowing that you can't take it. And I have a grandma who was very diligent about, I want you to have these things, and I'm going to give them to you before I go because I don't want my kids and people arguing about it. And now I'm moving to an assisted living near my other kid. And she made those decisions earlier in her life so that when her health declined, no one had to decide all those things. She'd already done it. And I think that's actually a gift that you give to your family when you can deal with some of those things in advance and make those decisions ahead of time. And there's more room for joy once you make some decisions, you know? And so I just think that we can look at why we keep things, but then we also can process why do we need to get rid of them in a similar way.
Right. No, those are really good points. It's true. It is stuff. And this past year I've been really trying to have a mindset shift on everything, and that was one of them, is getting rid of stuff that was literally just sitting there. Why? And I had to really think, okay, why do I still have it? And then once I got rid of it, it was like this sigh of relief, and I was happier because I was no longer stressed out about it just sitting there, you know, by me telling myself, well, maybe next year or maybe in 6 months. Well, there, and I know now why people have that rule. If you haven't worn it in 6 months, it needs to go. And I apply that with everything. If I haven't used this and it's still in a box, I've been here for 2 years, it needs to go because obviously I don't need it. And it's hard though, because, you know, there was a reason why I got it, but the reason was probably not a good one. So, you know, and yeah, we could talk about this for hours, but yeah, how has the process of trying to help people with this, how has it been? Have they been receptive? I'm sure there's some difficult parts to it, but how has this whole thing been?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't really know I was going to talk about hoarding. I didn't really focus on that as my business, desire. I wanted to deal with housing issues. I wanted to try to do something for people that are homeless, and I had this like big, broad idea, but I hadn't really honed it in on anything. And this whole thing kind of started through veteran women igniting the spirit of entrepreneurship. And I went to an event in Seattle, Bellevue, and I ended up working with some business mentors through that. And we had a chat about what am I doing? And I said, vague things. They're like, well, what else do you know about? And I said, I know about hoarding. They're like, oh, well, there's a show, and you know that, right? I'm like, yeah, I know. It's terrible. Like, it's a terrible show.
Yeah.
Because it was very triggering for me to see that type of scenario and people living in it, and the arguments that ensued because people had different ideas about how they should be allowed to live.
Right.
And through that conversation, though, I started to realize that I actually did know a lot about this, and I had survived it, and there were some tools that I used to survive it, unwittingly, surviving, not really realizing that these are things I did. And I started to see that while the shows focus on the person that hoards, and there's a lot of other people that are impacted by this issue that don't really have a voice, and are expected to fix the problem. And I was like, well, that's pretty backwards. How am I supposed to come in and fix a problem I didn't create, that I don't understand? I was a kid trying to survive. Now as an adult, I'm supposed to come and fix this. So for me, it has evolved into this mission of, hey, wait a minute, we aren't talking about this the right way. Hey, we're criminalizing mental health things because someone has a hoarding issue. And then I started to realize hoarding can lead to homelessness, because if you have too much stuff and you're renting, and then you don't meet your inspection, and now you get evicted over time, and now that goes on your record as an eviction. How do you rent a new place? You get this being known for trashing the old one.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? And so I see there's a lot of need for us to be addressing this at a higher level, with rules and laws, and relooking at the fact that hoarding is now considered a disability.
Mm.
It has a mental health diagnosis. Just because you have too much stuff doesn't mean you're going to fit that criteria. But you have to look at that as, well, what is our disability in here? Am I evicting properly? Am I following the ADA guidelines, if this person has a true diagnosis? And so it can be really challenging to deal with it, because often the person doesn't want to hear they have a problem. And my in I would say overall, the people who have hired and worked with me were ready for a change, or something forced it, like their landlord wasn't going to renew the lease. The challenge is when someone is facing eviction but refuses to accept any help. And I have had this happen. You've done the walkthrough, you've talked to the housing advocate, you've done everything you could up to that point to help that person, and they still refuse it. And then you are in a place where the chips kind of fall where they may. And to me, that's very sad. And part of the reason I think it happens is because we don't intervene early enough. An inspector will see, this place has a little clutter. And then a few months later, it happens again. This place has a lot of clutter, but no one says anything. Or they will issue a citation that says you have 30 days to fix this. That person doesn't know where to start.
Yeah.
So at what point do you say, we recognize, Tom, that this is not, what we're issuing to you is not working. How can we do this differently? And I see a need for us to be intervening earlier if we want people to remain housed. And I have also discovered through a lot of conversations that there's a lot of veterans that deal with this. Sometimes it's because of PTSD. Sometimes it's dormant, and then something triggers it. And this could happen for anyone: a divorce, a death, that you lose a pet, a move, and that behavior then picks up its pace.
Right.
It's very challenging to work with someone who doesn't want help. It's also very challenging to work with someone who does want help, because now you're working through the story and hearing it, and they're having to make decisions about their stuff, and they may have not had to do that before.
Yeah.
And so it can take a lot of time and a lot of patience to sit with someone and hear their story and let them talk through their stack of newspaper or whatever it is. But I see it in a way as twofold. One, as it is a helping profession when you're organizing and you're helping and you're doing that, but it's also like a dirty jobs profession where sometimes you are going to need a hazmat suit. You are going to need a respirator. There is like this multifaceted problem sometimes that we are just either ignoring or stabbing, and we aren't really intervening in a way that's helpful.
Right.
And I just see a need for that. When you can step back and look at that person, and that's why I think it's important to separate the person from the problem. When you can step back and say, I know that Mrs. Smith was in foster care. I know that she lost her own dad at a young age. I know that at some point she was homeless, or she lost a child, or she went through a divorce, or her parent died. Or if you can step back and start looking at them as a person and what has happened to them, you can start saying, oh, now I understand this a little more. I understand this better as what they have gone through. And I think you can come in with a little more kindness. And I think kindness is important because you have to be direct. And if you're just being nice, you're not allowing that directness to take place. And so I kind of come at it more of a coaching perspective, like, tell me what's going on, tell me, your perspective, and then let's talk about what you'd like to see happen in your space,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that you can't do right now because there's too much.
Yeah.
I had a client who, she used to do all these arts and crafts and all these things, but severe health issues kind of moved in and took over her life. And then the clutter came about because her spouse became a caregiver as well as working full time. And so how do you maintain all these things? And so I see issues within long-term illness as well, where you may have kept a pristine home before, but something has come up that has caused you to no longer be able to do that. And it's challenging for home health aides to come in and help you if they can't get in the door.
Yeah.
So there's people in the stuff, and I think it's important for us to recognize the people.
No, absolutely. How do you think this has helped you from how you grew up? Do you feel like, I don't know, how do you think this is this almost like a self-healing journey kind of way, because you could give back based off of the fact that you know how it is because you kind of grew up in that situation?
It has become healing. I have had a couple conversations recently with people who've known me for quite some time, even when I was a kid, and I said, what I've decided is that it takes a lot of fertilizer to grow a beautiful garden. And therefore, I'm going to take all this fertilizer and use it to help other people, because otherwise, what's the point? What's the point in going through some of these things if we aren't using it to help other people?
Yeah.
And so I've had many conversations with God or your higher power, if that's how you see it, where I'm like, okay, you need to show me what the whole point of this is, because I'm not getting it clearly. And so it has become one of those things where I can be in almost any situation. I can say 2 sentences about what I do, and all of a sudden someone is telling me their story, their experience, what they've seen, their neighbor, someone that they love, and they're like, it breaks my heart. And I agree, it breaks my heart. But I also think that if you see someone in the ditch, someone's got at least 1 foot on the road. Otherwise, how are you going to pull that other person out of the ditch?
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of look at it that way. And I've recently been looking at my why, and I had focused a lot on my experience as a kid. I call it hashtag YLIF, youth living in the Hoard. And then I came up with hashtag AKOPTH for adult kids of parents that hoard. And I realized, I started looking at the experience my younger brother had, and I was like, wow, his story is even more awful than mine, when I think about the fact that he was in a wheelchair and he had muscular dystrophy. So already you don't fit because you're a kid in a wheelchair. And now you live in this kind of cluttery environment, and now you don't fit even more. And now you go to youth group and you can't get in the building because there's no wheelchair ramp. And so what I'm starting to really realize is that his voice is part of my why. His story is part of what needs to be told, because there's other kids like him right now living in these situations. And I wouldn't necessarily say parents choose this. It kind of gets dumped on you sometimes, and it's overwhelming. And how do you manage your marriage, your job, your kid? Oh, now you have a disabled kid. Well, I'm going to use that term. My brother had his name was Daniel. He had a great sense of humor, and I miss him. He's been gone a long time, but we were good friends when we were younger, believe it or not. We didn't kill each other as teenagers. We tried, I'm told. Um, which I think in that way we were kind of normal kids at that point. But when I look at his story, I'm like, good grief, it's even more challenging to have survived that and graduated high school. And I mean, I felt very guilty because I moved out as a senior in high school. He was still living there. I couldn't get him out. Even years later, I couldn't get him out of there. And I always felt kind of guilty because I left him there in that. And there's a lot of people who, in my position, who did the same thing. We left and then we feel guilty because we left someone behind. And I think for me, that's another reason why I have to talk about it in some ways, because I don't want other people to feel left behind and misunderstood. And I totally get what it's like to not fit in, to be this, like, you know, I didn't have the cool bag to carry my stuff. I had a sturdy old backpack. Well, guess what? Now I'm carrying a sturdy old backpack because it just doesn't hurt my shoulders as much. So, I mean, there are practical things that we learn as kids that we can carry forward. But now I have a tip sheet that I made for youth living in the Hoard. And I see it as valuable for kids who are in school who are struggling, because if you don't have somewhere to do your homework, that's really challenging. You may not have running water. I experienced that. Where do you wash your clothes? How do you take a shower? And so I had people in my life that I was able to wash my clothes in high school at my grandma's. I took swimming classes, and so there was access to a shower there. And I hear more and more people telling me the reasons why they took a part-time job, like at the YMCA, was so they would have access to a shower. When you're a kid, that is not something you should have to worry about, you know? At least in our society, we are very westernized and formal, and I realize that, but and you're not going to die if you don't take a shower every day, you know. But I mean, as a kid, there's this kind of this expectation that, you know, it's bath time, so I just have found that I scaled mountains I didn't know I was scaling with tools I didn't know I had. And then I step back and go, oh, there's other kids that need to know about this. There's other people that need to know that this is a problem. And if a kid comes to school and they don't have the appropriate clothes, or they haven't been able to brush their hair, you know, kids are going to get bullied and teased no matter what. But the more you stand out for some negative reason, the more someone's going to bother you, basically. And I just think it's important for people to recognize that homelessness is a problem, hoarding is a problem, you know, having parents that have an addiction of some sort is a problem for kids. And a lot of times they didn't choose it. They're just dealing with the aftermath of it. And I think we could stand to be a little more compassionate as people when we're looking at a situation, to really step back and go, what's really going on? Because we judge on the surface. And I'm guilty. I've done it. You know,
we all have. We
all have. But I think that's one of the things that's great about getting older, is I don't worry so much about what everybody else thinks. I worry about, what do I think? What do I think about me? Because I have to go to sleep tonight with whatever that is.
Right. That's so important. That it is. And I think, we need to keep reiterating that, not to worry about what other people think. We need to love ourselves first. And that's a hard thing to do.
It is. It's really hard, especially if you think I'm not valuable or I'm not worthy. Why, if I don't love me, how could anybody else, type of thing. I've had some great reminders this past week with a couple different conversations about you need to value yourself before you can expect other people to value you or pay you.
So true. I keep hearing, I've heard that quite a few times as well. It's such a difficult thing to hear. And then, yeah. Oh my gosh. Tammi, gosh, I know we could talk about this forever because it's so important and I relate to it so much. I thank you for doing this and for God to put you in that path, even though this wasn't your intention in the beginning, it led you to it. And now you're doing such important work for so many people that need it. And I think it's amazing. And like we spoke about before, it's a topic that no one really wants to bring up. No one really wants to admit it. But if you peel back that onion a little bit and start to really think about why you're in the situation you're in, then, people like you can help with that. And I think it's awesome that what you're doing, and we're cheering you on, and I know you're going to help so many more people. So thank you for doing that, for being you, and for being on here.
Well, thank you, Annette. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the work you're doing so much. It keeps me going, oh yeah, that's right. There's someone else out there like saying, hey, we got to talk about this, people.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And my chosen family has become my veteran brothers and sisters. They've been amazing and still are.
I love it. I really do. This past 2 years has just been such a eye opener and just a game changer. Just lives.
Absolutely.
Why don't you let us know where can people find you if they want to talk about this?
So I am on Instagram, and I'm trying to think, where am I? Instagram and Facebook so I'm at the Hoarding Solution. And I'm also, I'm Tammi Moses on Facebook if you want to connect with me there. I have a website. I will have a website again called the Hoarding Solution. But the best way right now to probably reach me is on social media. And I do have consults available. I can do this virtually for just about anywhere someone is. We can have that conversation and create a plan,
Yeah.
And I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy to connect, because sometimes people stumble into this and they don't realize what they're walking into, and it can be quite shocking.
Right. Well, thanks again, Tammi. I look forward to seeing you, in what, 6 months or so at the next MIC?
Yeah, the next MIC, San Antonio.
Yay. You have a great weekend. Happy Heart Day. Happy Valentine's Day. And I wish you all the best.
Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you so much, Annette.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Truths We Hide podcast, created by A Wild Ride Called Life. To find out more about our mission, visit www.awildridecalledlife.com.